Hi, guys, and welcome. This is Jen Gaeta Siciliano, artist, memoir writer, bipolar psychiatric survivor, and your host of Not As Crazy As You Think podcast, the place that offers an alternative perspective on mental illness, highlighting creativity, non-conventional healing, and breaking on through to the other side. If you are ready for a new narrative on the mental realm that celebrates crazy and cool without penalty, then Not As Crazy As You Think is for you. Hello, this is Jen Gaeta Siciliano, your host of Not As Crazy As You Think podcast. I have a wonderful guest with us today. I'm so psyched that he's able to join us. Meet Shaman Manex Ibar, a mystic renowned for his transformative work as a spiritual guide, healer, and teacher, with a deep focus on reconnecting with nature's wisdom and unlocking our innate consciousness. Manex offers psychic clarity and practical techniques to illuminate individual paths toward realizing one's highest potential. From everyday individuals to prominent figures like doctors, CEOs, and celebrities, Manex has empowered a diverse range of clients, drawing upon his initiation into the Lakota medicine tradition at the age of 16 and wisdom gleaned from 12 master teachers across various lineages, including Tibetan Bon, Shoshone, and Algonquin traditions. Through channeling and personal encounters with nature's elements, such as surviving lightning strikes, Manex simplifies complex spiritual concepts, facilitating transformative experiences with spirit consciousness. As the visionary founder of Sphinx Code, he leads the charge in pioneering the science of subconscious architecture, revolutionizing approaches to personal growth and enlightenment for seekers worldwide. Manex, thank you so much for joining the show. I'm thrilled that you're here with us. Welcome.
Thank you. It's such a pleasure to be here. And what a nice introduction you gave.
Okay, so you know what? Let's just start from the beginnings. I mean, what is your background? I know that you used to be a Sony executive, but this is not where you are now. So, although you may help many Sony executives. So tell me how you went from that role to the current role you're playing now. Like, how did you find your personal spiritual path and where did it all begin?
Yeah, I think that's it's unique with everybody, right? And at first I was kind of brought up in France, therefore I was like the Catholic path and was interested in spirituality from a young age. But very quickly I started laughing at the priests for their sermons, which obviously had, a 7-year-old boy that's laughing at you all the time was annoying. So he gently asked me to get out. And I kind of felt rejected, and therefore I put a cross a bit on spirituality, thinking it was just a waste of time and a bunch of stories. Until at 14, I popped out of my body. I won't go into the details of it, but out in the woods, popped out of my body, had this experience of, in a way, I've had other death experiences. So it's a little bit of the same, where you're outside your body, you're kind of in this limbo land, and your senses change in a way where you start hearing things that you're not supposed to hear, like owls speaking to the trees, to the worms and the radars of the bats were like all integrated, and I could see it, and all of that, which is in a way by our standards called crazy, but it wasn't. And when I came back into my body, all the memory of all of that was intact and was very profoundly marked in my consciousness. And so, in a way, because I had gone more towards physics and science rather than spirituality, by kind of closing off, by being rejected, this intrigued me because it was a personal experience, obviously, that I couldn't deny. And yet it didn't make sense in the scientific realm. And so it kind of started my quest of trying to figure out scientifically what was this other experience. And on top of it, they started to continue. And then I started having a series of extreme mystical experiences. As you mentioned, getting hit by lightning was one of them. And yet also being initiated through the different paths, like the Lakota path. Even just doing sweat lodges, I started hearing voices, I started seeing spirits, I started interacting with spirits as you do them over and over. It's like the same spirits started coming. And luckily, I had guidance, and therefore they were called initiations, because otherwise it does feel like you're kind of losing your mind.
Right.
And even then, you're living. So I started living this parallel world of being initiated into this whole other way of communicating with the human brain, and yet being in science, the music technology and the whole real world, in quotes, that our society likes to say is real.
Speak to this, because I think that so many people who are experiencing this for the first time and connecting with their guides and connecting with their voices and, wanting to be open to that, they do need to live this like parallel life, because not everybody accepts both of these things, especially in a Western tradition. It's not seen as something that's even real, and then it becomes like, okay, that's delusional. And maybe you need, lifelong meds to quelch that, So like, I'm curious, in your personal experience, I know that you come from, your father was a physicist and you come from a family of doctors. Like, how did you start kind of walking this path without too many frowns from the family?
Oh, I got frowns, especially from my dad. My mom was a little bit more open, where she had ventured into some psychics and some things, because in her lineage there was a bunch of psychics and people who did automatic writing, but most of them predicted things so clearly, and usually was not hopeful things, but it was kind of disastrous. And since those came true, you kind of don't become very popular. And so it was shunned and it was cut off. And yet she had that. And especially she had a sister that really opened up into that world and explored it. And so for me, on top of it, I got made fun of when I had this experience outside of my body, because this native called me a medicine man. And my guitarist took pleasure in kind of laughing at me. And so people give me nicknames and other stuff. But for me, I kind of wanted to move it away, but it just kept coming.
Yeah.
And I was having these, basically spirits talking to me. I had weird dreams. You feel the pressure in the chest, all this stuff, ringing in the ears. And then you hear voices in your head and you think you're going completely crazy. I started even seeing auras, and I was already somewhat initiated, so I knew the words. But even when I started seeing auras, I thought my eyes were going up. And I had to go see the optician, who was like, no, you should go see a Buddhist and figure this out, which is actually how I got into Buddhism. But so my mother was into it. I had huge arguments with my father, actually, especially when my grandfather died and was actually in a coma space. And I was able to go, because I was being trained at that time to journey shamanically into different realms. And so I was able to go and talk to him while he was in this state of coma. And he was kind of saying, like, I'm ready to go, but your dad's kind of like keeping me attached. And so how do you tell physicists who's super black and white, there's a heartbeat, therefore he's alive, and then there's not, and he's dead, and there's nothing in between. And so it was kind of interesting to discuss with him that I had been able to go and communicate with his soul and his spirit.
Yeah.
And come back, and him thinking I'm completely delirious and delusional, and it's impossible to. And so we had to talk about what happens after death, and,
right.
And for a scientist, you can't speak of it because nobody's there to test it in a sense. And yet now they're starting to play with near-death experiences and testing the mind and the body, and seeing where the impulses and the electrical charges in the brain are still happening and firing, even though technically they're dead and their heartbeats stop. So we're seeing some advancements, but I think there's some limitations, unfortunately, to the science and even to the technical capacity to be able to test for these other conscious possibilities that we have.
Right, because the nature of our tools don't really bring us into that ethereal realm.
Yeah, exactly.
We are using these like materialist tools to measure something that it can't measure. So I love how people are being more open, especially in these days, talking about, it seems as though many scientists are interested in the idea of consciousness.
Yeah.
because of, the AI revolution. And, it's like, what is consciousness? The fact that science still doesn't know.
Yeah.
I know they're trying to come up with some kind of unified theory of consciousness, which they're not in agreement on this. So it's a very interesting thing. And I think we still have to default to, the shamans and the mystics on this topic.
Yeah. No, it's for sure. I mean, Wade Davis, who's a scientist for the National Geographic, who's probably the one who spent the most time with shamans, always says that, like, by spending time with shamans, he's realized that the shamanic state in our perception would be called psychosis.
Right.
You're psychotic. And he's like, so all these shamans are basically professional psychotic people,
Right.
except that because of their tribe, because of their way of seeing the world, they're not dissociated as crazy and they're actually integrated. And by that integration, the person is able to disassociate when they're speaking with spirits and when they're speaking to a person that's live and for real.
Exactly.
And because of that, they don't become psychosis. They don't develop the psychosis. And so it might be a reflection even of our own society,
Yes.
which is obviously psychotic by not integrating the psychoses of itself, which seems to be apparently what we all need to figure out.
I mean, this is so important for me and life affirming for me to hear you say something like this, because this is what I needed to discover on my own personal journey. Like, I didn't even know anything about shamanism until I started reading a little bit and saying, wait, whoa, whoa, whoa.
Yeah.
This is what we're experiencing, people who go through psychosis, and we don't have any initiation. We don't have any guides. We have nobody to help us through this so that we can integrate. And instead, it's stopped. The process is stopped with this very heavy, medication and life-changing narratives that are saying there's something wrong with you. You need to be fixed. And because they only reduce everything to the physicality of form, like there's really no conversation about it. So this is thrilling to hear you say this. And I understand that didn't you also experience, I mean, not psychosis necessarily, but like a depressed state while you were experiencing, like, I guess, your initiation. So it seems to be so much overlap of these moments where we have mental distress that allow for this new state to kind of emerge. Is there a connection of these states?
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, I think because of the lack of initiation, it has to go through that process, which is a process of suffering, right? And extreme loneliness and rejection, right?
Yeah.
And basically, as you feel completely rejected, and yet you're trying to open up to your own gifts and all these things that you get from hearing to seeing to having deep intuition to even through touch, feeling what people feel, and then the other denying, because we do, in a way, we're encouraged to lie about our emotional states. And so we don't have that honest conversation when intuitives and empaths and then people who even have further gifts are able to see things that are unsupposed, their gifts, and instead we turn them into faults. Yes. And almost curses, right? And a gift is a curse to a certain degree unless you know how to use it, right? Because it can drive you crazy, or you learn to initiate yourself through the path of disciplining the gift into something that's practical and that can then be of service to others, which usually it is. Yes. It's not so good for our own life as people who have these gifts, right? So
yes. True.
Which adds to the craziness, right?
Yeah.
Because then people are like, well, if you had all these gifts, why don't you go buy the lotto ticket and win? And you're like, it doesn't work that way.
Right.
And it's like, well, why not? And it's like, well, because that would be for me and it's for others, right?
Yeah.
And so, but I had to learn that, and teachers told me that, because of course, when you get these gifts, you want to get better for yourself and you start using them, and there's actually a karmic retribution towards that. And so there's a cause and effect that comes back and slams you, because these gifts are meant to be offered to humanity.
Yes.
And luckily science is coming up, but I think there is some lack of technology. I mean, maybe with the quantum science that's arising, we're going to be able to have tools that are developed that start encompassing the multidimensionality of our capacity, like, I mean, we still don't understand dreams. We
Right.
don't understand these awakened states. We're starting to find the different frequencies that the brain gets into in terms of gamma and delta and alpha and beta. And that in sports, it's better to be in one, and another one when you sleep, it's better to be in that. And then in these weird shamanic altered states, you actually get into these things. But yeah, and there's Corinne Kilburn, who's a French shaman who discovered she was a shaman. She was a media person, and she went on this documentary in Mongolia, and the shaman started playing a drum, and she just went straight into, hearing voices and trance and visions, and she had no
Yeah.
idea what she was doing. And they immediately were like, "Oh, you're a shaman." And the whole crew was like, "Guys, you're a shaman." She's like, "I'm not a shaman. What are you guys talking about?" That was like craziness. Eventually, she accepted it. She went through the training, and then she went into the science and was like, "Guys, like, test my brain."
Yeah.
And in Canada, with all these psychologists, they tested her when she would go into these altered states, and they basically called it a complete psychosis crisis. And then she would come back and be completely normal. And that's where they were like, "What? That's not possible. You just went into psychosis. You can't come back and be normal." And she was like, "I
Wow.
just did it. And I can do it back again and again and again and again," which she did do. And her spectrum was so loud, like where the shrinks almost couldn't handle how psychotic she would go
Oh,
into,
wow.
and then how she could be normalized back into her regular state. And she's like, "Well, that's training."
It's very helpful to hear that if a person really receives some kind of proper training, that this state can be accessed by will rather than by accident. A lot
Exactly.
of us, because we can't kind of control that process of how to get there, we don't know how to come home when we get there.
Mhm.
And then so you're led by this institution that's, as you're showing with this story, they're trying to prove one thing and it's not what it is at all. It's so much deeper
Exactly.
than that and so much grander than that, because we're talking about all these levels that are, I guess, unseen. Whenever things are unseen, people who are in the sciences, right, they just write it off.
Blocked.
But you have been in this field a long time. And what discussions can we soon look forward to in your interaction with people who are becoming more open in the sciences?
Yeah, I mean, I actually have a book that's coming out that's called The Doctor Shaman, because I had a lot of doctors that end up calling me when they have issues. And so there is more and more doctors that are actually opening up because they're not sold on the pharmaceutical solution,
Great.
and they have more of a holistic concept, but they don't have the tools to deal with the emotions. And I think there's a huge opening to emotional intelligence that needs to be accessed to really tune into our senses, which have been dimmed so much from bad food to brainwashing, I'm going to call it, just by the program of saying you're crazy versus you're gifted. I mean,
Right.
what's wrong versus what are you feeling? Like, there's terms that we use on a daily basis that are condemning of these experiences and these senses that are actually very real. And most people are starting to open up and have some type of experience, whether it's a really strong dream and it kind of keeps coming at you, or you hear voices, or you see things. And I think hopefully the scientific community will create more openness to, in a way, have initiations into this field where there is logic of how do you train somebody who has these gifts to be able to use them correctly without going crazy.
Yeah.
I mean, if you have a spirit that's always bugging you in your ear all day long, like sending all this stuff, it's really annoying. Like, and you can move them away and say, in 20 minutes, I'm going to talk to you.
Yes.
Like, go chill out, and like, and
Yeah.
I'm the boss, so go away. But I remember actually a circumstance when I started kind of opening up to my clairvoyance, and you can kind of see certain thoughts that people have and emerge. And I was seeing this guy who was like talking to my girlfriend at the time, and his thoughts were pretty raunchy and quite rude. And I was about to go and fight him, and my friend was like, "What, dude? You can't go fight a guy for having thoughts. Like,
Yeah.
your girlfriend's gonna think you're nuts." And I like remember thinking of that and being like, "Wow." this is really crazy. Like I can't, yeah, I'm in a different level of existence compared to people who aren't seeing that. And I called my teacher, Jill Lee, and I was like, how do I shut it off? And she's like, I just turned it on. What do you mean you want it off already? And I was like, of course I want it off. And she laughed when she heard the story. And she's like, okay, you can learn to turn it on and off when you use it. And it's true, when you're in a bar, you probably should not have it on, because it's not the best place. But
Yeah.
when you're in the mountains and you want to hear what the birds are saying, and maybe you open up to see some of the other beings that even exist, that science has said it's all myth. And yet there's so many mysteries. I mean, science for me is so young. It's 200 years old. Shamanism is over
Right.
20,000, if not 30,000 years old,
That's a
if not
great point.
millions, right?
Yes.
So it is a scientific method of observation and experience. And one of the things is so great about shamanism is there's not a book, and there isn't a guru, and there isn't a school, which is also annoying because it'd be great to have a school and to actually get trained. But there is a beauty in that because it's part of the earth, that awakens people into this path, and
Yes.
you get experiences rather than the guru teaching you what like God is. It's here, come and experience it for yourself, and you tell me what God is.
Yes.
And so that's a proper teacher that really tries to open you up. And I had many, and I think Buddhism has a little bit of that. They say, look, if you meditate this meditation for 88 days, you're going to have this experience.
Yeah.
Everybody.
Yeah. Right.
And then you have to have the discipline to do it in 88 days. In shamanism, it's like, here, look over there, boom, and they throw you in the thing, and then you're like in it, and you have to deal with it,
Yeah.
which the medical institutions might be like, no way, that's too brutal.
Right.
And it's shock therapy to a certain degree, and it can almost create trauma. But actually, when it's done correctly, and there is a will to heal, that shock is sometimes the only way to truly create that transformation. I saw actually Jackie Bailey, who's one of my teachers, Druid kind of shaman from Europe. He healed a woman that was having epilepsy all the time, up to the point where she was having 20, 25 a day. She's 18, and her mom just was exhausted, and she went to everything, and it's just drugs, numb. But it didn't work, right? And so she comes to the shaman, because usually that's the last resort. We send us to like, can you do something? And so he's like, yeah, I'll take a look. And then he asked me to go and like, hey, go make her a bath, And I was like, okay, fine. Turn on the water. I come back. I'm listening to them talk a little bit. And then he brings her to the bathtub, and he's like, here, kneel in front of the bathtub. And violently grabs her hair and dunks her into the water, and is like drowning her. And I'm kind of like, wait, I'm his apprentice, but like he's like killing her. Like, should I stop? And he looks at me like, don't move. And so I'm like, okay, this is a teaching. Like, whoa. It's like, okay, so he's under control. Pulls her out, looks at her deep in the eyes. She's in shock. And he goes, if you do one more epilepsy, I will kill you. And puts her back under, lifts her up. He says, do you understand? And she goes, yep. And she's never had an epilepsy ever again. Ever. So,
wow.
And then he went and explained that he's like, so epilepsies come. So this is because like, obviously we're all like, what just happened? It's so violent in one level. And obviously it's not very medical practice, but in a way, like it worked. She never had an epilepsy again. And she thanked him. And what happened is her father left, and the shock of her father leaving her created an intense need for her mother's attention. And the only way she would get the attention was by having an epilepsy, where the mother obviously would run to her. Mm-hmm. And so she subconsciously learned to have epilepsies to ask for attention.
Wow.
But eventually it became toxic for her as well, because it was not in control. It's the subconscious. And of course, the subconscious wants to be needy all the time. And we have to control that. Yeah. And so what he said and he saw was that he needed to shock to come back to the original person and tell her to stop being a child that's just asking for mommy's attention.
Wow.
And so by threatening her, he awoken her. And then, I mean, he had 3 days, if not a week, of training in a way and discussing, and also testing, is she going to have an epilepsy or not?
Yeah.
And she didn't.
Wow.
She didn't. And so even for her own consciousness, it was like, wow, that was crazy. It took like 30 seconds, but I haven't had an epilepsy.
That's amazing.
her mom cried when she came back. She
Yeah.
was like in tears. Like, it's he didn't tell her what she did, what he did.
Oh, really? I know
And
mother might have been very
yeah.
upset.
And in America, she'd probably be sued. He'd probably be sued. I mean, a
Yeah,
lawsuit, like
right.
the thing that could be seen as abuse. And so it's this weird fine line where
Yeah.
shamanism can be also very, very soft, like just a touch of a feather can kind of transform you, or the lightning strike, or the shock. There's a shock mechanism that actually is useful, which a near-death experience is. It's
Yes.
life coming to shock you into a different state of
Right.
existence and awakens you to the other side. Right?
And once you're awakened, you can't go back. It is
No,
something that is now part of who you are in your filtering system.
100%.
It's amazing.
And there's no coincidence that that accident happened and that you went into that state and that you came back. You know, if you were meant to be dead, you'd be dead, but you're not.
Right.
And the fact that you have that awakening to be on the other side, to defy science even, is the gift. Now that this is where the isolation and the depression can come, because instead of our culture being like, wow, you made it back from death, like tell us about it, we go, are you screwy?
Yeah,
Are you back all the way? Like maybe
exactly.
not. Like let's give you drugs because you're fucked up. You know, like you're messed up. And it's like, well, wait, I just went to death.
Yeah.
You know, I came back. Guys,
Right.
it's a miracle.
Yeah.
Like in the Bible, it would be, right?
Well, it's funny because my mother, I was raised in a Catholic faith as well. And my mother was always very religious and, like always going to church and whatnot. So when I started coming home and I had this near death experience on the plane ride back from India I had this I was very sick over there and I thought I was going to die and I got an emergency flight home and I had this near death experience in the clouds in the airplane and basically telling me, it's not your time, whatever. I came back to tell my mother this. I thought she'd get it, like being a religious person. But an organized religion is only allows you to go so far, especially Catholicism, which says the priest is the main intercessor, right? With God. Like
Exactly.
you don't really have that ability. You always have to work through the priest. So
Yeah.
it's like she couldn't wrap her mind around that. And then that's when I started getting worried because I was like, wow, if I can't go to someone who I see as very religious and allowing for angels to be real, if I say the angel saved me and she doesn't believe me, this is
Yeah.
only like step one of like me going down because
Yeah.
you want to be able to trust your parents, firstly. And then there was just no one else. And this is in 1994. The institution at the time was getting extremely away from, say, this more of a holistic psychology where the person is on their own journey and Jungian archetypes and stuff like that into the biomedical model, which was really reductionist and saying, you know what, we're just chemicals,
Yeah.
and if somebody's telling you a story that doesn't sound right, it's probably because their chemicals are imbalanced. And now we know that this isn't true.
Yeah.
But, it's taken many, many decades for their science to disprove their own science.
Yeah,
So it's
exactly.
it's very interesting, but I'm just so thrilled that you're on this path because you speak about it so eloquently and with such clear wisdom because of your experience. I understand this philosophy and wisdom, but I don't think there are enough people out there talking about this stuff. Do you feel that you're walking a very individual path that like it still seems brand new for many Westerners?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a definite opening that's happened, even with COVID,
Mm,
where I think isolation is another way of increasing your spiritual opening, which I think
mm-hmm.
backfired because that's not what they were expecting to do.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, you get depressed, and there is because there's no more social, right? When we were locked up and everything, and the social of the digital, it doesn't give you the same energetic feedback that we actually need as bio creatures. Um, and so I think there's some more opening that happened. I think a lot of people started seeing things differently. Others really closed into their belief systems and also don't want to hear about the other side
Right.
and this opening. They want to kind of almost stay in the status quo. But I think there is a lack of real learning and real teaching. And so there's a lot of people that might have these experiences, near-death experiences, and either they run away from it, which usually gets you kind of sick, or they jump in and they start using it, but then there's no guide for them. And so then they get into hairy situations, where they might even hurt somebody by guiding them, but not knowing how to guide them. And it's tough because if they want to go into training, the only paths are psychology, clinical psychology, or weird like Reiki. I mean, like that's not going to help you either. That's nice. It's working with energy, but that's not actually understanding how to navigate the subconscious and these altered states of consciousness, which I think Michael Harner called non-ordinary states of consciousness. And then the shaman is one that learns how to go from ordinary state of consciousness to non-ordinary state of consciousness. And it's a beautiful way. And in that non-ordinary state of consciousness, which you can activate through breath work, through shamanic drumming, which is like a way of meditating, through meditation, or through plants, and other medicines, like the psychedelics, which on top of it, when you see a natural doctor, a traditional doctor, they'll tell you to stay away from the psychedelic because it's going to push your psychoses, when actually it's going to help you initiate yourself into understanding the world because it pushes you even more into it. And actually, because you're already open, you probably are a navigator, a natural navigator within the psychedelic space. But they terrorize you, which then can actually lead you to have fear in that state, which is the worst way to go into a psychedelic experience. Right? And then the anxiety and the stress and all that.
All right. So let's get into the psychedelic thing. I am a proponent of plant medicines. I know that they've been helpful to me. I know you use them in your ceremonies. And can you talk about how, this idea that big pharma, right? They work with plants, but they extract like the compounds and they make it like, I guess, less natural, and it's like, I guess, most the purest state at which we can integrate ourselves in that space. But also just to give a little heads up to psychiatry, and what they're trying to incorporate now is a lot more psychedelics in the healing space. So, tell us a little bit about what you know about the whole experience today with this revolutionary idea. Again, I mean, this was done in the 60s, right? We explored this, and then we kind of like it fell away because it became like, it's something that we shouldn't touch. And yet all these years later, now we're revisiting this. So what's your experience with that and your knowledge about psychedelics?
I mean, you brought up several points, which are great. The first, I'll just say real quick, in terms of the extraction techniques of the pharmaceutical, one of the things is also just synthesizes. So they find the chemical that is the active agent, and then they'll reproduce that through like petroleum, through plastics, through engineering, and they make a synthetic out of it, which then they give us as a pill, and it can have healing effects. But the synthetic usually is missing the entourage effect of the plant. And so I would say that actually that extraction and the synthetic isn't so pure, because the entourage effect of the plant is what makes it pure, because it stays connected to its own nature. Yes. And those little significant small frequencies add to the whole picture, and actually sometimes makes it less toxic for the body, because it actually helps the body integrate it. And so there is something, and most scientists know this, there's just no money in nature because you can't patent nature, which is actually a whole point with viruses that are patentable. They're therefore not nature. But that's a whole other thing. So the pharmaceutical industry has done great things of making things available, like penicillin is great. to heal a lot of different things like aspirin, all these things. But they've also taken different plants that I'm going to say have a connotation towards the dark side, like opiates, which can be very effective painkillers. But we know, for example, DMT is a great painkiller, except DMT, there's no addiction, and it brings you towards the light. Versus opiates, there is an addictive aspect, and it brings you into the, let's say, more darker forces, which, you know, are pleasurable on one side, but also they can grab you and pull you into deeper, darker spaces of depression and everything else. So again, all plants have their purpose. And the old shamanic knowledge was to use these plants always in combination and in balance. So if you're going to play with a dark plant, you're going to also play with a light plant so that you have the balance and you can know the difference so that you understand not to get hooked in either. Because the point is not to get hooked in either and not to be needing a crutch for the rest of your life.
Right.
It's to learn from them for a certain time and then move on because you've gotten that aspect initiated or opened up in your own psyche. So I do use some of these, and it's interesting because for my path, because I was a scientist, all these spiritual experiences had to be without plants. So I did all of my training without plants.
Wow.
And it had to be real. It couldn't be brought through a substance, right? Because of my scientist, I was like, well, then I could just, it's not real. It's a substance. It's a chemical. And as you said, like in the 90s, that was a huge thing. So I had no plants, except for if it was for fun. And that's interesting because you can use these plants for fun, even though you have to be kind of careful. And the doses can actually then become initiations, which some people call a bad trip. But it's because you're not supposed to be like in a club again. With these substances. You're supposed to be in nature looking at the full moon and observing and reflecting your life, right? And this is where you clean. And so these plants have their purpose. And I found them after having done a lot of training with my mind, with meditation, with shamanic drumming, and having explored these realms naturally, made it so that when I did take the plants, actually, I was very quick to not get persuaded by, let's say, the hallucinations and pierce way deeper into their power of unlocking aspects of our minds. And so it was really like a beautiful experience. And very quickly, actually, the shamans were like, yeah, you go give the plants to others. You're already there. You know? And then music actually came back also through all these ceremonies. So the drums, I was a drummer. Music, that was like my passion. Music and frequencies is that what shapes a lot of this realm. So that made all this sense. And then navigating this, whether it's through psychedelics or not, which I still can lead people in both ways, depending on their preferences. Yes, psychedelics have a bit of an easier way for our tough ego minds to pierce right through and give access to this psychedelic psyche state, right? Which actually just opens us up to our personal subconscious and to the collective subconscious. And I think we know now in the science, it's like 85% of our decisions are made in the subconscious. So why are we not spending 85% of our education learning how to meditate and get in touch with our psyche?
Right.
It makes you question school.
I think it's fascinating to hear that you kind of went this path and you learned all these initiations without the help of the plants first, because it's like you trained yourself so well that I mean the plants do help with training, I'm sure, newbies, you know, and yet you just got there on your own, which it does kind of like solidify even further that scientific analysis, you know, that you went in with, because it's like, well, look, you could get here this way or that way, but I did it this way, so it's clear that it's something real. And, you know, I appreciate that. And I'm sure, you know, as people come across your work, they see the levels of wisdom that you have attained through finding out this path through all of these like real paths and like assisted paths, you know, which I think is really fascinating. Now, what I want to get into is I know that you channeled this kind of system called the Sphinx Code, and it's kind of like based around the tarot, and it has an archetypal architecture, which, you could certainly pull from Jungian influences. And can you like explain a little bit about how you
Yeah,
came into this came into being and focus for you and your really a big part of your life's work?
it is. It has been for the last 12 or more years. And it became my secret weapon or my secret tool for personalization, And it's
Hmm.
funny because I didn't like the tarot at all. Throughout all my initiations, I thought the tarot was kind of a joke. And then, sure enough, as life has it, because it's very humorous, it made me use the tarot as the tool that was the
Yeah.
most serious. And the tarot is interesting because of that prejudice, I kind of was like, yeah. This guy was telling me how amazing the tarot was, and I was like, yeah, but it doesn't. It's just divination, It's not personally interesting to get you into knowing yourself.
Hmm.
And yet he was arguing, yes, by divination. I'm like, yeah, but it's got to be more real, And there's that scientist in me that was always very stubborn in a way. Even though a lot of shamans blew my mind and gave me experiences that just defy everything. I studied astrology, I studied numerology, I studied the Kabbalah, I studied human design a lot. And I was using human design at that point as one of the systems that, for personalization, was quite great. And it helped to analyze people and open them up, especially in their emotional consciousness and certain physical um, things. And so when I was talking to this guy, and I was actually healing an eagle, he was a buccaneer, and so he had called me to heal this eagle that had been abused. And so we got this long conversation for 6 to 8 months. And I told him, okay, you know what? Like, if the tarot is so amazing, there must be another way that it's used originally
Mm.
that does help the person understand their own whatever. And we went into this meditation and we asked basically like the creators of the tarot and all the spirits that wanted to help us understand this tool on a much deeper, profound level. And immediately it was there was a channeling of a spirit that came and gave us quite a teaching,
Wow.
where there was an organization. There's actually several calculations. There's one chart, which is the archetypal blueprint that you can get in your app on Sphinx Code in the App Store right now. It will be in Google in a second. But basically, this archetypal blueprint is a chart that has 16 different positions, which define different aspects of the psyche. So, taking kind of Carl Jung's work a little further, where he had 12 archetypes as your personal subconscious, here you actually have 16. And the 12 that he had are part of the system, even though they're different archetypes, even though we can like match them. So there's 12 inner essences. And then you have the major arcana of the tarot, which has 22 different archetypes that will go and play in different parts or different positions. You'll have 1 through 22, and that makes this unique code that we call the subconscious architecture. And it kind of gives you this map of your masculine, your feminine, your inner essence, your positive and negative environments. And the real thing is your transcendental path, which is kind of your own unique spiritual journey to your awakening, to get out of your wounds and to activate your higher expression of what you're really here for, which is amazing because you can see, and I think it gives a lot of comfort to a lot of people who have certain gifts that they're just opening up to. And you say, look, you're not crazy. Like, that's actually where you're moving towards. Like,
Yeah.
you're going to be a spiritual teacher, like, or you're a psychic, or you're, a ceremonialist, or an alchemist, or da da da. And the archetypes speak. So, I mean, the download took a while, and then I tested it because I was already giving sessions through human design and my clairvoyance and energy work. And I think that also was a gift because I had that. I
Yeah.
was able to test the system very quickly, kind of in the background while I'm running other systems that are kind of improving.
Yeah.
And my clairvoyance and the energy and spirits kind of guiding me, being like, see the connection with this
Yeah.
card, and that's good. And so there's that chart, that's the major arcana, and there's a minor arcana calculation that actually more my wife, Victoria, came up with, which was part of the original channeling. They were like, there's a woman that's going to teach her the other chart, and that's all related to the moon.
Really?
But you'll have to wait for her to come. And I was like, great.
Oh.
So patience. And then she did, and she came and she plugged right in, and it was quite amazing because
That's
together
amazing.
we really deciphered this whole other thing where the minor arcana are basically playing much more with like the human design or astrology and all that in the link, and then so it brings it back, and so then it ends up that the tarot is one of the most mysterious and powerful spiritual technologies in a way that's been passed on since way back. I mean, it actually links back up to the I Ching, to the Sumerian tablets, to the Tara or the Tibetan traditions, her 22 forms, which is exactly like the 22 forms of the major arcana. Same thing with Kali and in India. And so you start seeing the patterns, goes back to Egypt, then comes with the Gypsies to Europe, and then the Knights of Templar have the same, and they've been weaving these tapestries, and you're just like, wait a minute. Like, so this is the deep, deep knowledge, and we've kind of lost it. And then even, you know, Alexa Crowley and Tom Wade, who brought the tarot into the English language, they messed around with it because it was kind of a time of illumination and channeling also, like in the 1600s, 1700s. And then they played, but they were trying to make all the occult work all together.
Right.
And so it's distorted, which is interesting. But when you go back into the code, the math, it describes how nature progresses and as itself through the Fibonacci sequence. And actually, our birthdays, crazily enough, have a sequence that actually shows you this map of your psyche. And it's kind of, it's mind blowing. I mean, I've been doing it now for 12 years, and I've shown it to people that, you know, are the most skeptical.
Yeah. And
here they are, and they're describing their mom and their dad, and it's a system, and they're like, this is weird.
Really?
And sometimes even better than you know, their shrinks.
Wow.
And I've done it to different psychologists, and they at first were like, man, when I saw the tarot, I freaked out. I was ready to run out of my room. But then you just start describe my whole life, like better than I've been analyzing for 20 years. So, wow, you know, chapeau.
That's wonderful.
So I'm trying to bring it out actually as a medical tool for psychological analysis.
Oh, that's so great.
It shows you, you know, and it can help you know which psychedelics, if you are meant to even take psychedelics, versus some people, they shouldn't take pharmaceuticals. Others, it's not a problem. Others, they shouldn't do mushrooms. Others, it's San Pedro. Others, it's DMT. Others, it's actually better that they develop their energetics without plant medicines. So you really see your whole psyche, and you start seeing like, yeah, you probably have visionary capacities.
Yeah.
And here's why. And here's also all the suffering that like your parents don't get you, and yet you pick them. So what's that about?
So there's a lot of like personal blueprint information in this that once you explore it's like you could probably design or kind of guide your own life in such a more less random way. You know, we're always listening to all these like various experts here and there, and we're trying to apply it to our lives. But if we have this like kind of map of our own life, it seems to, I don't know, it makes so much sense to try to make sense of what our purpose is and what our suffering is about.
Yes.
I mean,
that's a huge one.
Yeah.
You know, our suffering with our parents and being a victim of our parents or our situation, or our parents left, and when actually it's in your psyche. And if it's in your psyche, then you're not a victim of it. You're actually a part of it. And in being a part of it, then you have to start revisiting the storyline of you being the victim and more being like, maybe I even came in to do that. Therefore, why? And okay, I have an absent mother or an absent father or whatever it is. We all have stories with our parents, you know, like, and you have a kid, so you know that like they bring stuff out of you that you're like, this is not even me.
Yeah.
Why? You know, why do you make me crazy? You know, like, and it's their psyche that's calling that out of us to act upon their own wounds that they already have from past lives or other situations, or their soul needs to overcome that because that for example, my depression helped me overcome my lack of self-confidence, which then helped me follow through this path with full
Yes.
confidence. And
Yes.
so I needed those, to get into this and awaken this and have the confidence to go through this. So each person has their own story. And it's nice. I think there's a lot of reassurance, which I think a lot of psychology is supposed to do.
Yeah.
There's
Right.
reassurance of, oh, I get it.
Yeah.
Yeah, that is me.
Yeah.
And, oh, that's okay. Like, that's normal. Yeah, for you.
Right.
For this other person, it's totally not normal.
Right.
And like, actually, your mom doesn't get you at all. It's like, okay, that makes sense. Let's rewrite the story of
Yes.
I'm fucked up, and more like, well, she's different. I'm different, and that's okay, and we can love each other.
Yes.
But I don't
Yes.
have to come into her way of being.
Let's go back to that suffering for a moment, because I really want to pinpoint what you're saying here and link it to one of the, I think, fallacies or the wrong paradigms that is involved today with, say, psychology or psychiatry. And it's that one of their main purposes is to alleviate suffering.
Mm-hmm.
And to give you tools to do that. And a lot of the times the tool will just be to mute it, to numb it with the medication or something. But isn't it important to kind of like take that suffering and kind of find out what its purpose is in our life? Because there is a sense of, if you go through it and you come out on the other side of it, there's a transformative process. And a lot of people never get there because they're not able to go through that process, because it's like, okay, well, everything's kept here, but if you keep it there forever, it's not going to bring you to where you need to go. So, I mean, this is like a different way of looking at suffering as well. This kind of giving it a story and making it make purpose in our lives and meaning.
Completely. I mean, Buddhism taught me a lot about suffering because it talks about the three jewels, which is everybody's suffering. There's a path to it. Here's the path. But I was like, okay, well, that's one path. Shamans looked like they were having a lot more fun. And it was more rich with experiences. And I was enchanted to know that I was more part of that, which is true. Suffering, on top of it, I found one of my teachers told me that it's a French, or Latin or Greek. Suffering comes from sulfur, actually, and sulfur in alchemy. There's three: sulfur, mercury, and salts. And sulfur is the soul. And so, in a sense, suffering in your physical body is your soul giving you a message. And so, if you look at it that way, it's like, well, why am I suffering then? Because you're not listening to your soul.
Yeah.
Well, you have to already know that you have a soul and that is real and that it is asking you to realign to its purpose. And so the alleviation of suffering is, in a way, your training of refinding your purpose, your soul, your authenticity, in a sense. And so we're called into that. And I think the ancients knew through rites of passages how to reconnect to that part, and they integrated it into their lives. I think as the Industrial Revolution came through and modernization and technology, we lost touch with a lot of our rites of passages, and therefore these initiations to open us up to that part of the world, of our own world, the soul. And so now we're starting to come back to it, which is a good thing. And I think psychedelics are definitely opening up to it. Meditations are huge. But yes, I think drugs, in terms of pharmaceutical drugs, put them in quotes, they have a purpose for acute moments of crisis. And they're really good for that. As soon as you start using them as a long-term Band-Aid or a solution, that's not what their purpose was ever. And that's the laziness or the pressure of your psychologist. The acute aspect is, yes, get back to a certain balance. And yes, that's chemical and okay. Just like psychedelics. You're not supposed to use psychedelics for like 20 years. Unless you're a shaman and you're actually leading ceremonies. And even then you have a whole different way of interacting with the psychedelic. So it's an acute thing. It's a help. It's a crutch. It's a band-aid. It's a plaster. It's a, a moment to get you to understand that. But then the practice is, how do you deal with that emotion? How do you deal with this gift? What do you do with that?
Right.
And then how do you transition to actually make it a gift?
Yes.
I think had lucky circumstances with the different teachers and with beautiful individuals that basically opened up doors for me.
Yeah.
Even though my ego was definitely not into being a healer, it happened.
Yeah.
And in a way, it threw me into this journey to heal people. And I went through, like from the little things, like my finger's broken, what do I do? My back hurts, what do I do? Or I have, mental health issues, continuous depression for the last 15 years. I have fertility issues. I have cancer. I'm about to die in 2 months. You're like, okay. Up to the point of even leading people through their death, and like I think there's a whole role that our medical establishment doesn't honor, but it's the accompaniment of death, and people are very scared.
Yes.
And the priests used to be much more prevalent to explaining or trying to explain the spiritual side and giving comfort to those. And I think hopefully there's still some priests doing that, but it's less and less.
Yes.
We kind of just medicate people. They become numb, actually almost unconscious, and then they go away. And actually, it's really not a good thing, because the spiritual then, when you do die, you're numbed.
Yeah.
In going into that whole world.
Right.
And then you miss different opportunities, and then that's how ghosts are kind of created.
Yeah.
Where you have a spirit that's kind of floating around in space, lost, basically.
Can't find its way.
Can't find its way. So yeah, I mean, this whole world is huge, and it's so amazing. And I remember actually when I started opening up around 16 and 18 to the whole clairvoyance, and I was like, oh my God, I just understood this world a little bit. And now there's a whole other like multidimensional world. Like, it's so exhaustive. How am I going to ever learn this?
So you were about 18 when that happened?
Yeah.
I could see in you this, the scientist in you, right? And when you started experiencing these clairvoyant experiences, you must have been trying to test everything out, right?
Totally.
Share with us like an experience where you knew for sure you were on the right path and this was indeed a clairvoyance, rather than just like this like kind of thing that was just entering your headspace and you couldn't make sense of it.
I mean, I think the doubt is always there, because some of the experiences sometimes are also crazy that you're like, what? Like, how is this? And then usually if you stick with it and try not to put too much judgment on it, it reveals, the answers reveal themselves. And I think that was what the guidance was, is the teachers being like, I'm not going to tell you what you saw. You're going to sit with that for a little bit, and you'll see how it manifests. And then you're going to understand your own visions little by little, much more. But yeah, around 16, 18, I mean, at 16, the Sweat Lodge was the first kind of big initiation that I had, which is you bring in rocks, lava rocks that you heat up in the fire for about 2-3 hours. They're red rock glowing, fireballs. And you put them in this little hut where you cover it. It's like an igloo that's covered in blankets. And you go in and pour water on these rocks, which creates steam, and it's super, super hot. And basically, it goes right into, talk about sufferance. You get shocked into almost like, oh, I'm going to die. And by that, in a way, you go right into the spiritual, psychological warrior type of energy where you're like, I need to survive, but I put myself in here. Some people pop out, but like in a way, by going into that deep meditation, things start happening, start opening up. And I think when we do get threatened with our life, the spiritual then is practical, right?
Yes.
If you need to open a door, you don't need a spirit to open the door for you. Like trying to like do it magnetically, like it's like ego in a way. It's that But when you're in a sufferance, or when you're in an initiation, or when you're in this like really tough moment, spirit can come and say, "Hey, listen to me. We can get through this,
Absolutely.
And check it out. You have all your ancestors behind you helping you." You're like,
Yeah.
"What? Oh my God. All my ancestors are here." Like, that's crazy. But no, it's not. They're always there. You just got opened up to that, right? And then what do I do with them? Like, so what? They're looking at me every time I'm in the shower and doing my thing? Like, yep, pretty much. Oh my God. Well, wait, can I have privacy? And so these are some of the discussions I had with actually my teachers after. But the sweat lodge was the one that opened me up to, in a way, see in the dark all these other spirits. And in the shamanic realm, it's nice because you start, and this is where you start with the animals and your animal spirit guides, which is great because with kids, they love them. And who doesn't love animals? And so you get these teachers through the animal kingdom, birds, whatever, zebras, foxes. There's all the animals can be spiritual guides for one level of our world, and then they actually help you to rise to your higher spirit guides, which is the upper world. So there's the lower world, the middle world, and the upper world, and shamanic principles. And so navigating and learning how to navigate the lower world helps you ground into the natural world. And then you move into the upper world, which is where you see your spiritual guides and then your ancestors, and then you can just go all over the place in many different places. So there was the sweat lodge. And then, I think it was probably around 1819, this woman from New York, actually, who was introduced to me by a Tibetan monk right around when I was opening up at clairvoyance, and I went to the optician. I thought I was losing my eyes, and he was like, "No, you have better than perfect vision. Go see a monk." So I go see a monk, and the guy was, teaching in meditation on listening to the end of the universe and seeing all time, which my science mind was kind of like, "What is this?" And in the meditation, it was wild because I was able to see this really cool, like, little Chinese guy who was like teaching all this stuff and playing with energy and throwing energy, and he had this little yellow suit and this big stick, and he was kind of beating me up. I was kind of like, this is such a wild imagination that I have. And then the Tibetan at the end of the class was, and I brought my friend, and my friend was like snoring, which was really fun. He didn't see anything. Meanwhile, I'm having like a whole visual trip, no substances. But the shocking thing was when the Tibetan guy comes and goes, "Hey, you, come here." And he then described everything that I just saw. And I was like, "Oh, how did he get in my head?"
Wow.
Like, and wait, that wasn't just my imagination. Like, and he was like, "Yeah, you've already done the Buddhist thing. You're a shaman, like medicine man. You have to go see this woman and learn the shamanic way." And I was like, "What do you mean I've done Buddhism?" He's like, past life. And I was like, "What is that?" And like, I questioned it. And so he had to tell me like the whole karmic cycle and souls come back and like on a Christian level or science level, that's crazy. Meanwhile, way later, I realized that I could actually see people's past lives, and I could actually interact with them. And sometimes it was part of the healing that they needed to hear those messages of what happened, sometimes physical. Like, I mean, you literally pull out a sword of somebody and their shoulder like fixes,
Wow.
It's pretty wild. So I met this woman, and every Thursday night we would do these meditations, like just with a drum. And you kind of open space, and you beat the drum very kind of like a trance beat, and it moves you into different cognition and relaxes you, and then all of a sudden you start journeying, and then you always put a certain intention of where we're going to go, if you're going to go see the dead, or if you're going to see your animal totems, and what are you going to do with them, or your spiritual guides. And so for 2 years I studied with her, and it was amazing. I mean, it was stories, and it was like entering a different world, and these meditations were just amazing. And I would encourage anybody to use shamanic meditations, because the drum does have an effect on opening of the mind to see.
I'm sure that you've learned so much. I mean, and the great thing is that all of this training that you received, in some way, you've discovered it within yourself, but then you knew that you could take it into the the realm of helping others and sharing with others. And it's like it gave you each time you experience something like this, it like gave you a deeper insight as to how to help others achieve that. So I guess like overall, you were being led by, your purpose, your higher purpose. How do people get in touch with this, say, without a sweat lodge? I mean, like, I always wanted to do this kind of initiation, and I would love to still be open to it, perhaps with you one day, who knows?
Mhm.
I mean, clearly finding one's higher purpose seems to be one of the ways to alleviate our personal suffering and to kind of, realize our soul contract.
Yeah.
Where do people begin? I mean, clearly they could start with like your Sphinx Code thing. And,
Mhm.
most people are like in this middle zone of
Mhm.
living in the real world and not taking
Mhm.
too many risks. So, what do you suggest? Like, how can people begin to remove the blocks that are in the way to helping us achieve our higher purpose?
I mean, definitely, as you said, the Sphinx Code is an amazing app that I created for this. I mean, there was a lot of contemplation of whether we should put it even out there or should I
Mm,
keep it
mm,
as like a tool and just teach healers, And I really felt like, no, we're at a time when people just need to learn.
mm.
And unfortunately, school doesn't teach you about you. And we need more tools. The astrology is great. The pattern is a great app. Human design is great. It's a little complex and confusing. This is quite easy because the tarot is figurative, where there's a storyline just by looking at the image
Mm,
that your mind is already connecting to. And then
right.
if you just spend some time on the positions and what the positions mean, and then you read the descriptions, you'll notice yourself very quickly, like, yeah, this is coherent to me. And the key is the transpersonal path. So you have your harmonization key, which is in the bottom right of the archetypal blueprint. That aligns you. So it makes you work to start changing and elevating your frequency, changing your ego and your wounds. And then all the way on the top right, there is your soul mission and your purpose. And so
Mm,
it brings you into the vision of where you're meant to be through those two, the harmonization key and the soul mission. That's the first step. So you can read about that and start resonating with that.
mm,
Secondly, I think, I mean, eating right, sleeping well, and drinking water, essential.
mm.
Then we should probably put that first. Then certain meditations. And I think a lot of people say that word meditation and they go, oh, Tibetan Buddhism, like just empty your mind. No. Meditations, there's so many different types of meditations, and the shamanic meditations are so wonderful because they take you on journeys. I mean, that's what we call them, is
Yeah,
journeys into your subconscious, and they're
yeah,
so rich. It's like an awakened dream, and you can start seeing the same spirits as you go deeper into it. And today, with headphones, the drum is there.
yeah,
Some people, and I put like different frequencies that help us go into those theta states, so you can see more of your
yeah.
subconscious. Those are really amazing. They're cheap, they're available, and you just need to find the ones that you like. I also have a clairessence course, which actually opens you up into understanding your clairvoyance. So you start seeing your energetic system. You open up your psychic screens. You activate your energy flow within your psychic system, and then you start learning how to go into reading, chakras, auras, cords, entities, devices, spells. How do you channel and all this stuff? Which I think, again, it was a course that was given to me. At first, it was very secretive, and then I was like, this needs to be out there for people
Yeah.
because there is so many people that are opening up to their psychic, and there's no school.
Right.
There's no Harry Potter school that you just enter into a wall. I
Yeah.
wish. But luckily, I think I was gifted a lot of teachers that kind of created that. And hopefully,
Yeah.
I'm looking to with doctors, actually work on creating a medical center that has this dimension as a equal part to the medical. And so there's the medical physical, there's the medical psychological, and the medical spiritual
Oh,
all working together. with personalized, natural medicines to help us balance our physical, our emotional, which is very hormonal. The
Yeah.
energy and the subconscious are directly linked to our hormones. And so
Right.
getting into a hormonal flow, I think that's why like the depression aspect plays, because it's a lack of serotonin because we're not doing what we're meant to,
Mm-hmm.
which is a lot more spiritual for a lot of people.
Yeah, absolutely.
So meditations for sure. So I think the third thing that to me gave me the most insights and grounding, because I think one of the things with when you have a near-death experience, when you open up your psychic aspect, you kind of, you're up here, you start seeing things from another place, and we lose our ground very quickly.
Right.
And so I did these vision quests that I started the Lakota. It's so tough and crazy, like there's no water, no sleep, like buried, blah blah, that I never wanted to do it again. But then I had another teacher, John Milton, who started the Way of Nature, and it's way more gentle. And
Mm.
you have your tent, you can bring your sleeping bag, your comfort, you can even bring a little bit of food if you want, or if there's no bears around. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and the point is to be alone with yourself in nature and just
Mm.
hang out with a tree for 4 days,
Wow.
and sleep there and don't move, don't hike, like stay. And
Wow.
that's something that's really interesting. The restraint of movement for us is it makes us, triggers us basically.
Yes.
But in doing so, you also through 3, 4 days, really after the second day where your mind goes really like get out of here, you're hungry, and it's uncomfortable, blah 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 blah. By the third day, there's something that happens where you start sinking into a deeper level of yourself. And oftentimes emotions come through, which is great. Like my whole depression stuff, like I cleared it through that.
Yeah.
I had a separation with the mother of my kids that was able to clear as well through that.
Mm.
Um, and then I get about but and so usually you get a gift from nature that gives you that security that of
Mm.
I'm not crazy. This is real. Like,
Yes.
this is in me and I'm fine and I'm grounded into it. And nature responds to this gift.
Mm.
So I'm now going to find the right humans. And unfortunately, yes, the family oftentimes is the one that challenges you the most,
Yeah.
thinking you're crazy, maybe even putting you in hospitals and whatnot.
Mm-hmm.
And this is exactly the challenge
Yeah.
is that the family is going to, it's like you're escaping their commonality, right? And they don't know anymore where you're at. But if you've had real experiences like that groundingness that hanging out by a tree for 4 days does, and it fulfills your depth of your being into a securing, I can't, it's like reconnecting to the mother, like on a
Yeah.
deep level.
Right.
And it's like the roots are in there. When you confront your parents, instead of being like, no, but you don't understand, it's more like, this is just
Mm.
how it is. And it
Yes.
shifts because then they feel like you're secure and you're knowing. And if you stay in that knowing, then they usually let you continue being you
Right.
in with this whatever gift it is, or
Yeah. Because there's
they
less
don't
worry.
know.
They feel that there's not this antagonistic energy coming at them. So it's, oh, it must be okay.
Exactly.
This is just so refreshing to hear. I mean, I feel like I'm hearing new things that can help me because, the grounding thing is always an issue with
Yeah.
many people who hear voices and who have not been safely initiated.
Yeah.
So, we are still like kind of out there in between worlds, right? We're 1 foot in, 1 foot out. And kind of also dealing with this very rigid institution that is still denying a lot of these real states of mind for so many of us. And yet something as simple as grounding by just sitting near a tree for 3 days. Like it's like, but it makes perfect sense.
Mm,
And it's like aligning our DNA with that of the tree, right? It's
mm,
kind of just
exactly.
like rooting ourselves so that we can incorporate that essence and energy into our own being. I mean, it's probably would be so much more beneficial than what goes on in the hospitals, which I know because I've been inside of them 7 times. Okay. So it's really like, I hope that you get to this point in your career and your purpose where you really bring so much of this wisdom and these practices into the hands of open-minded holistic doctors. And and I say this very, very specifically for the field of psychiatry, because there is a whole new movement. There is a movement in holistic psychiatry and in the psychiatric survivor movement who are saying, wait, stop calling us crazy. We're having spiritual experiences. This is a spiritual emergence. So to hear that this is like something that really can be applied practically, for people who are trying to help others. I know that they have good intentions. It's just that they're missing so much of the technology, that's needed to help others. It's like they're ignoring so much of this. We need people like you out there who are preserving, these traditions and allowing others to benefit from, their power.
It is. I mean, it's the empowerment.
I thank you so much for that.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Yeah.
It's the empowerment of understanding that there's so much more.
Yes. Right after that last part of the interview, Manex and I got disconnected. But I want to thank him for really making such a splash on the show, giving his insight and wisdom in a way that was so profound and had such clarity and insightful wisdom that I am just so thankful for him giving my audience his time, energy, and depth of understanding. If you'd like to learn more, please follow him on his platform. He's on Facebook under Manex Ibar, so it's ManechIbar, on Twitter at Manex Ibar, but it's spelled ManexIbar, the real spelling of his name. He's on Instagram as The Shaman Says, and his website is manexibar.com, manexibar.com. You could explore all his services there and have access to all of his books and other resources and offerings that he gives. If you would like to take a look at his Sphinx Code information, go to sphinxcode.com and learn more about that and download that app. It was a wonderful time getting to know him and having a shaman kind of validate so much of what I know to be true. Thank you. Thanks for listening to Not As Crazy As You Think, and don't forget to subscribe to my YouTube channel. And remember, mental health is attainable for anyone, especially those labeled with mental illness. Until next time, peace out.